Oh, howdy. I'm the True Wise Gamer, giving off my vast knowledge so you may understand games a bit better. You know, a lot of games after Final Fantasy X from Square Enix have become a lot of middling mix. And it's really sad in a way, because as you can tell through a bunch of the games behind me, they do make some good games. Except this one, of course, but hey, we don't hold them against them too much for that. But if you know anything about Final Fantasy 15, you know it had the bumpiest ride to ever coming out. And sadly, we really didn't know at the time how bumpy a ride it was until way after its release. Yeah, to summarize Final Fantasy 15, it wasn't Final Fantasy 15 at first. It was once part of Final Fantasy 13 as Versus 13, which just keeps proving to me that anything tied to that will always be a mess no matter what. So what particularly caused the hang-up that allowed Final Fantasy 13 Versus to become 15? So, okay, let me try to explain. Before we talk about that, we need to talk about 12. Yeah, I know, it's a weird conga line of mess up. So Final Fantasy 12 was taking longer to make, so at the time they decided to stop developing 13, which was also going to be a PS2 game. And well, time happened and it was just made into a PS3 game, on an engine that was being made as it was being developed. And well, it was decided for some strange reason to make spin-off games for it that uses the mythos of 13, and really the only good one that survived it all was Agito or Type Zero, which, speaking of... Agito! If you get the reference, cool on you. If you don't, I don't hold it against you. It's a reference you wouldn't get. Don't watch Agito. It's really bad. In any case, Versus is going to be one of those spin-offs, but the problem started as the idea was really never cemented other than a few concepts, and even then, only a few of those ever came across to us, and were also, sadly, left to the wayside. And it was not helped with the game's plans being changed on a whim. And after the release of the 13 trilogy, it was decided to actually make it its own thing in order to get away from the mess that shit was making. Thus, they had to rush development a lot just to make it complete, or at least complete enough to be sure that everything's functioning, and ship it out as fast as possible. And it really shows really hard. Honestly, there will never be a point where we will ever know the true travesty of a mess that this game was ever in. Except at one point figuring out it was going to become a musical, which I actually looked up. There have never been a musical game until this game comes out, which I'm surprised I found out beforehand because it was before the PlayStation experience thing, which it was okay. And it was not helped with people saying you need both the anime and the movie to understand the game, so it already gave off FF13 vibes, which, oh god. So, why mention all? Well, for context, for those who don't know, honestly, I didn't know it at the time when I first got the game. It was before I started to more critically look at games and actually ask the question, why do I like them? And in all honesty, I still have that time. I'm having a hard time at points just to honestly criticize this game. I mean, this game and I have history. I remember pre-ordering this game with lunch money and convincing my mother to let me just have the day off from school just to play it, which worked. Had to wait at the dental office for like 3 hours. That was hell. So yeah, I got a lot of history with this game, and we'll talk about it more later as we begin the review for Final Fantasy 15. So Final Fantasy 15 begins with a flash forward that does nothing. I legit don't get why it's here, because it really doesn't hype you up towards anything and it's just there. In any case, the game really begins as we meet our four main protagonists. Noctis, the Prince of Lucius, Gladiolus, the Shield, or his bodyguard if you prefer, Ignis, the butler of Noctis, and Prompto, his best friend. They are leaving the city of Insomnia to get Noctis betrothed to a woman named Lunafreya. This is to be a political marriage for reasons we will get into in a bit, as the king is staying for a peace treaty from Niflheim, who they are at war with, though more on this in a bit. And after some parting words from Noctis' father,
We then cut to them as their car has broken down, and thus they need to push it to Hammerhead. I really don't know why I love this scene. I think it's because it gets me to understand the characters of the boy bands really easily. I won't lie, when Stand By Me plays, it really did help too. I still think it's a solid introduction to the characters, and I like it. At Hammerhead, we meet Cindy and Sid, mechanics of Hammerhead. Sid is actually an old friend to King Regis. There is something I actually forgot during the editing process of this, that being the game King's Tale, as it was released as a freebie after the game came out. And it's alright. It's a decent beat 'em up for what you're getting. So if you can get it, go get it. Weirdly enough, it's not on PC for some reason. So after fixing the car, they find out, oh no, they're out of money in the local currency. Yeah, I really have no idea why they didn't come with Gil, or why the entire currency isn't just Gil. I mean, like, how does that even function? Anyway, in order to get some money, we are tasked with hunting monsters, and we are allowed to go anywhere. Sort of. The game is a bit chapter locked, so you can't go that far, but you are able to go a little distance to however you want.
I'll talk about it more later since it's tied to a lot of the other gameplay stuff, including the combat, but let's actually talk about a good chunk of the combat now since, well, it doesn't really evolve much after this point, and when it does, it's very later on, it doesn't really change that much. So let's talk about it now.
So, combat is fine, I get. It's complicated. You see, combat for Noctis is very easy, as he has access to 4 weapons at any time which he can summon at will. This is due to Noctis' power and bloodline, as he holds the power of kings, that allow him to do all this. But so can his friends, though it's a little more complicated, I'll try to explain. See, Noctis as a kid got hurt real bad, and it really stunted his growth, and thus he is not even as powerful as his father in his prime. The only thing that Noctis is very good at is that he's just able to do a lot of things on his own. Also his healing, but we'll get to that. It is particularly why he's the only one able to warp around, while the others can only walk around, though can summon weapons at any time. I'll talk more about this in a bit. As I mentioned before, Noctis is able to use all weapons with ease, and is able to switch around at any time. A lot of people don't know you can actually change how the attacks go by holding a direction, which can be useful for certain monsters, but can be ignored at most times, since monsters have a lot of health. In fact, everything has more health than you, though luckily you are never alone. Mostly. Noctis' friends will always try to help him and have his back. Gladiolus with his big sword with light slashes, Ignis with his knives and always able to move around quickly enough, and Prompto using his guns to, well, snipe out foes. While they are not the best at what they do, they will always try, which you can also expedite with tech moves, which allow you to join up with them for a special attack that varies in usefulness, as some moves are just better than others, which I would always tell you to liberally use as it recharges really quickly. The team can also join with Noctis to use both Link and blindside attacks to deal a lot of damage, though they can sort of whiff at times but are still useful overall to getting fights done quickly. Lastly, there's magic, but it is an oddity. See, as I mentioned before, Noctis' abilities are a little stunted. The best he can do is draw magic out of elements into a flask and just make it into a bomb. You can add special effects to these, but that's it. They are very unwieldy and are more likely than not to harm your team than your actual enemies. Well, until an update happens where you can get an item that you can equip to make sure that that doesn't happen, but you get the idea. However, ironically, he can actually channel his magic into something more useful. Potions. Yeah, potions. See, Noctis is able to make a drink into something with healing properties. How this is very unclear, but it is a thing mentioned in the Ultimania. God, I swear on my life, that thing has caused more problems than anything else. And mind you, you'll be using a lot of these over the course of battle as, yeah, for some strange reason the game makes it so that you take a lot of damage and enemies don't take a lot of damage. For some reason, I really don't get it. I'll explain more of this later, and by the end of the game, you'll be just chucking that shit into yourself so much. But we'll get to that when we get to that. At the end of combat, you are ranked on by how long it took, how much damage you dealt, and finesse, which, let me tell you, finesse will always be low since it's tied to parrying, and you will rarely ever do that since it barely ever happens.
And that's mostly the combat. Well, yeah, there's pretty much some more stuff with the DLC. That's pretty much it. It is really that simple. But I think that it's charm because it's simple and doesn't need to complicate it more than it has to. I think it adds to the kind of play it at your own pace sort of games out there that I'm okay with. I don't know why. I'm okay with this combat. It's just how it is for me. But we're not entirely done with it yet, as there is more and mini system tied to it. For example,
ranks don't matter that much other than giving AP if you have an item equipped to give bonuses if you did well on that particular part of the rank, which allows you to expand your prowess for not only yourself but your team by unlocking benefits. They range from okay to downright useful, like gaining more stats based on your level, which is important for the later game since certain areas have certain levels of enemies. Which left me a bit mixed, as by the end game, I never went back to the normal areas, or the earlier areas, because the rewards become so minuscule that you'll only ever do it for completion. That's it. Weirdly enough, in most of the reviews I've seen, not a single one of them ever mentioned the best way to gain AP during battle. That being Warp Strike. It's an ability Noctis can use to deal a lot of damage to foes, if he's far enough, and if it kills them, it doesn't have to be a one-shot, it just needs to be the final thing that kills them, you will gain AP. And it was useful for endgame stuff when I remember playing it on my first go-around. And you're going to do it a lot for the endgame if you want to max out everything. That or driving. But speaking on levels, how do you gain them? You gain XP, but you don't level up. Well, essentially, you're storing the XP until you camp out for the night to rest. Unless you have an item equipped to stop that, though why that in a bit, as it's tied into a lot of other things. And while camping, Ignis will start cooking. Yeah, he has a thing for that, like, they all have a thing for themselves. Noctis with his fishing, which is a minigame in and of itself, which I didn't do that much, but it's fine for what it is. Gladiolus with his survival stuff, just him walking around so he can find stuff. Prompto with his camera taking pictures on your journey, and they can be fun to watch. I mean, seriously, some of these photos are just meme-worthy in and of themselves, with the characters posing or just oddities like this woman. I have no idea who this woman is. She wasn't in the tunnel, so I have literally no idea who this is.
So, okay, I later on found out that that photo, the woman in it, that's actually Laura Croft. Yeah, that was actually a cross-promotion for either Rise of the Tomb Raider or Shadows of the Tomb Raider. I'm not sure which one, but it doesn't really matter at this point now because they don't legally own Laura anymore. Laura? You know, we all say the name differently. I don't really care. But anyway, because I seriously don't get why. Because they sold it off for just scams. That's all they sold it for. Scams.
Anyway, it was fine. But back on point. Ignis is able to cook a meal on ingredients you find in the world. It is never not funny to hear his catchphrase.
That's it. What's what? I've come up with a new recipe.
Though, why would you need the meals? Well, they give a stat bonus, kind of like how the Tales games do it sometimes, where they give you a bonus for a while until you're done with a battle, except it's for a duration, not just the one battle, which is useful. And while you can get meals as shots, they are overall weaker than what Ignis can make. There's also the fun benefit of just staying at a camp or at a hotel, which also allows for mini-events. You see, one of your team members might ask you to hang out for a little bit to do something. Maybe just talk, or maybe just have some fun. Which I think are very nice, as it allows for us to see how they work together. Though I think they could have done more with this, as we will need to talk about this in a bit.
I kind of want to make this point here now that I kind of want to genuinely apologize whenever I say I'll talk about it later. I just need to do that as it's easier for me and for you guys to just follow what I'm thinking and doing when I just say that, because I rather talk about it when it really matters. Because talking about it now would just bog the pace of everything and just keep me from not moving forward. But it doesn't really happen anyway, because this thing is over like an hour long and it still feels too long.
It's a very cool idea. However, the problem is that sometimes the game forgets to make them impactful at times with the leveling system. Let me explain. See, as you progress the game, you could stay at inns, but why would you do that? One reason and one reason only. XP multiplier. They can give out a lot of XP, like double or even triple XP, to just allow you to just gain a lot of levels really quickly. Which is why some players will just stockpile XP so that they can just quickly level up and move on. Even then, it's not like the game's that hard. You just need to level up every so often so your stats can at least match them. Though again, they did later add an item to allow you to stockpile items even if you camp, so you can do that whenever you want. And so you can wait at night. Wait, why would you want to wait at night? Well, simply because, well, that's when the demons come out, and certain activities require you to do it at night. So, let's get into that now. One of the activities you can do in the game is hunting, which is, one of the easier activities to do. Just go find a monster and kill them. That's all. They are just mostly beat up monsters that are just over there. These are one of the first examples of the activities you are given and are by far one of the duller ones. Like, after a while, it becomes annoying to journey back to a town to gain a new one or turn in one. Especially for the night hunts for demons. Yeah, demons. We'll talk about them later. Especially at towns, since you can't wait at towns at night for some reason, even though you can do it at campsites. Though speaking on the demons, I wanted to mention something about the towns in general. You see, in Super Eye Patch Wolf's video, he mentions he was confused on why the towns and settlements were designed the way they are, and why there was no defense for them. Simply put, they're just not that particularly pointed out. Wildlife and, in general, animals will stay away from settlements since they have their own environment and don't need to worry about them unless they are pushed out of their environments. And even then, if they do ever wander near one, hunters will usually come around and attack them just to push them back. But what about the demons? Well, demons stay away from light areas since they just hate the light in general, so again, they will stay away from it as far as possible. And there was a side quest in the game where they mentioned the type of light they use are designed to make sure that demons stay away from them. So, there you go. And again, the hunters are around, so even if a strong one comes around, they'll be weakened enough so that hunters can handle them. But with that out of the way, let's actually talk about the open world in and of itself, which, yes, I know I'm a little far into the game talking about it now, but my reason is just because it fits better here where it's more shown. While the world of Eos is very beautiful and it's really well designed in my opinion, it is a slog for the most part to travel through. It will try to mitigate it with some of the later things you'll gain, like a chocobo, which honestly should have been given to us early on so that it would have made traveling around the world a little more easier. Sure, one side quest would suffer, but to make people slog for this long is not acceptable in my opinion. Because I have to mention this, traveling in this world is not that enjoyable. The world is too big with so little to do in it. And yes, I know they tried to later on make it faster, but it's still slow enough that it's still not the best choice. And again, I know there was an update that made it have an off-road option, but it again still lacks because it can't go anywhere I want. If I've learned anything in game design for open world games, is that the first thing you need to focus on is how you move throughout the world. Because the bigger the world you're in, the more you have to make traveling it enjoyable or at least tolerable, which I don't think the game does well enough. It does it fine in some regard, but just not enough to where I would deem it as adequate. I won't lie that the Chocobo really does make traveling better, and it is the fastest way to move around. Thus was always the thing I used whenever I needed to get somewhere quickly while on foot, which is also the best way to mention something about the Chocobo. This one has the best Chocobo theme ever. It is like some amazing, I don't know why it's this fantastic. Yoko Shinomura always does well. This one just hits it out of the park for me. It's pretty good overall. For example, how a lot of the themes in the areas are, very different from one another. And they actually have variants within them, depending on where you are in that area, which is really cool. In any case, it's not to say that going on foot was boring, it was just not engaging on its own after a while. The best way to put it is that traveling is fine when it's on your own time, but when you want to get something done, it is a chore. And that's also not to say that the side quests were bad, just journeying can be a bit annoying, as we will explain in a bit.
But, okay, we've been holding off the plot for way too long, so let's actually talk about a few more things in the plot.
So after getting the car fixed, we begin our journey to the port so that we can, get to where Lunafreya is. Though not before meeting Umbra, a dog of Lunafreya who passes messages between the two. When we reach the port, we actually meet this mysterious man who talks in riddles, who we will have to talk about a lot later on, as he tells us that the boats are down and we need to wait. While waiting, we find out some shocking news. The kingdom of Lucius has fallen with its king. The Niflheim peace treaty was a ruse just to get close to the city and take the city and the crystal, the power source of the Lucius line's power. Sort of, it's complicated, we'll need to talk about it near the end. I know, that last part's weird, I don't have a good way to explain it until the end. This shakes Noctis to his very core, as he's unsure what to do now. However, good news comes around as Kor, the Shield of Rages, decides to meet up with him and try to explain to him what's up. They meet up at the tomb of a former king, and Kor explains what the deal is. So, the king already knew that this was already a losing battle, and likely knew this would happen, and thus allowed it to happen so that Noctis could get away and stay safe. Kor then further elaborates that the plan is to get Noctis powered up while trying to meet up with Lunafreya. He will gain strength by gaining all of the royal arms, former weapons of kings before him, though many were lost due to time, which is weird as you would think they would have been moved so that they weren't handled by the enemy or monsters, which happens a lot in this game, as we will find out. This is also where he will gain the power of the Armature, a super form that allows him to devastate most basic foes with overwhelming power. It is as simple as it sounds and is just mostly that. There is a true cool form, but I will talk about it later as we'll need to talk about it. Though there is a slight problem to that as it is literally impossible.
Yeah, let me explain. Remember that goal I just mentioned not 5 seconds ago? About finding all the royal arms? Well, you really don't. In fact, most of the royal arms are not required. Only 7 out of the 13 are actually required. The others are just foundable throughout the game. And it's really not helped with how the game's overall plot is also just stopped until you're able to go to Alticia. Which is really weird when you really start thinking about it. So that's sort of untrue. I'll try to explain.
As it's not that simple. See, after exploring and finding more royal arms, Noctis is having a headache with also visions of Titan and Archeon. And just let me tell you this now, it's complicated and I don't have an easy way to explain them other than they're the gods of Eos. Soon after meeting again with Arden, he explains that they need to meet Titan. So going there with its help, we are able to also find another royal arm and fight Titan, which is actually kinda dull as it's mostly a spectacle fight rather than anything really interesting. After beating the boss, we also learn that Arden is also the Chancellor of the Niflheim Empire, And after rescuing us, he sets us on our way, though without our card. It'll be a bit of a trek before you can actually get it back, and if you didn't get the chocobo, well, sucks. But you are also placed at the area where you can get them, so mulligan. While resting there, you also meet Getiana, the servant of Luna Freya, telling us she's fine and she's beginning to awaken most of the other Archeons. She is now currently in Alticia to awaken Leviathan. She's also previously awakened Ramu, so after teaming up with Ramu, we decide to actually, rescue the car, because god dang it, that car's too important. This is also the section where you're actually taught about summons in general, and let me tell you, they're basically the win button whenever they come up, because essentially they deal a lot of damage, so it's again just a win button, though it just comes up whenever. I mean, you can do stuff to adjust the particular statistics of how it comes, but it'll come whenever. I actually forgot to mention this. The game will actually give you times where you can invade a base and try to take it down, but they're usually trying to be stealth missions, even though more times than not, you can just brute force it all, except the times when they say you can't, for some reason. Anyway, these are fine. They're just there for their sake, rather than any real reason. I'll talk about the Empire later, because it's more tied to an issue later on. After rescuing the car, we meet Luna's brother, Ravis, who's a dick. Wow, he's just a dick. That's pretty much all he is, and I think this is where I need to mention the other material. And we do need to talk about it since it is a bit weird. So, if you know me, I hate FF13, a lot. That's because a good chunk of its story material is in books and elsewhere that leaves the story as a confusing mess, while here it's in an anime, a movie, a prologue CD drama, which I could say without a doubt in my mind, unless proven otherwise, which, please do so. I'd like to be corrected on this.
And I'll just be blunt about it. None of them are really that required. The anime, you can argue, should have been more discussed in the game, but it's still not that important. Plus, it was free and available for everyone, so I'm not really in the mood to say that you should have seen it, or at least say, I have less reason to hate it than every side material of FF13. Because you still have to buy books that are non-translated. Well, until 2019, but still. And let's actually go into Kingsglaive. Basically, all it does is just elaborate on what particularly happened during the invasion of Insomnia, and that's pretty much it. There's literally nothing more important about it than that. And even then, I argue that movie was pointless. And, oh yeah, I'm reading my script right now, and I forgot to mention Ravis lost his arm during it, which also doesn't really matter. I'm sorry, it's just how this thing is. I really couldn't remember it, so I had to actually have my script over here just to remember that plot point. Because it's somehow important, yet unimportant at the same time. Oh yeah, right. There was also a CD drama. It's just a prequel. Nobody cares about it. There was also another book, but it's not important, and it was more or less just trying to elaborate on something we'll talk about later.
I'm not going to pretend that it should have been in the game to make it a better experience overall and should have been at least mentioned, since it would have helped the overall story with not only flow, but with characters, making them overall stronger. My point is that people say it's required, but it really doesn't do anything other than expand on things we can guess or don't really need to know. I say all this because it does tie into the overall problem with Final Fantasy XV.
That being one of the biggest complaints about the game being that FF15 doesn't have enough time for all the characters except our main crew, and really, I can't disagree with that. The game just doesn't give enough time to them at all, other than the main cast. Well, except Aranea, because people like Aranea.
This issue is only odder when you realize there was plenty of time to give them some characterization. Heck, after waking Ramu and Titan, it's mostly filler until you reach Alticia, which overall hinders the plot because, again, there's barely any time with the characters. I mean, there is a guy who dies halfway through the game who only had one scene, and everyone acts like we should care about this guy. Like, why did they even bother to do that? I do want to say that the main crew, on the other hand, was pretty good and was interesting to watch as a whole. Their personalities never really grinded against each other, well, except near the end, but that's a whole other matter. It's more like there was never a moment where they grated on me, which was always good because I rather not hate my main characters. I mean, sure, they might have had their weak moments at times, but they still have enough solid moments throughout the game to make me love them as a group. They really bounce off each other well, and I'm really glad that the voice actors were able to do that so well. I don't have any problems with Gladiolus' voice actor. I'm just mentioning him for a moment because there's something weird about how he voices Gladiolus. Like, he does this, like, come on, get up. Like, you know that thing where you're kind of like holding your voice back a bit? I can't explain it. It just sounds weird to me. Like, is this just a me thing? I'm not saying like he's doing a bad job because he sounds fine. It's just he sounds odder at the same time. I know that sounds weird. It's just how it is for me. I still like his character though. However, like I mentioned before, their past is something that rarely happens or is really not given much insight, except in the anime, which again I mentioned before. Since it's free, it's not on my radar. I will still agree it should have been touched upon in the game, which it doesn't do that much. And the DLC tries to do that at times, but it doesn't work that well. And with the mentioning of the DLC is where we need to talk about it, as it really needs to be talked about. You see, the game, as I mentioned before, was released before it was in a proper state. Though, to be clear, it's not like it was in a bad state, like it ran perfectly well. It's just that certain ideas were just not properly handled. Because you see, the massive problem with the DLC as a whole is
it should have been in the game. Like, there's no argument you can make that holds at all as, like, I'm trying to elaborate because, like, some people will say, well, they didn't actually, like, take them out of the game and just resold it later. No. They just made holes and just decided to add DLC into it later, which is kind of more scummy if anything. Because they decided to make a plot even more inconsequential or incomprehensible at times. Like, they're not that important entirely, sort of. Like, Ignis is the one I would argue is the most required because it deals with details that are just not explained. And it's just, like, why? Like, here's the thing. I bet on my life, if they had decided to just release all the DLC for this game for free, as in the Prompto Ignis Gladiolus DLC for free, not a single person would have complained and just said, thanks for adding it? Because at least then you would have gained goodwill and made people, like, aware of the game and more willing to try and buy stuff for you. I don't know why I'm flubbing. But I'm keeping it anyway because this was just a bad idea and just instilled a lot of negativity.
the DLC can be broken down to the character they focus on, and it usually tries to give them an arc in them, but it doesn't always work because they don't lead into the game all that well. Gladiolus DLC leads into the game well enough, but the lesson he learns from it is something that was always a thing about him, which is weird. It just more emphasizes his gist about being strong and protecting Noctis. But the DLC doesn't do a good job of why he wants to protect Noctis. I felt it should have either done that, or made the journey more personal about how he's afraid that he's not even strong enough to protect himself. How is he supposed to protect his friends? And yes, I know that would have made the DLC a little longer, but I argue they could have done that with the rest stops with Core. Because Core would have been a good jumping off point to allow for more characterization for him, which they do for the DLC, I'm just saying more of it. And less product placement for cup noodles.
Actually, let's talk about the cup noodles for a little more. Because here's something else a lot of people don't know. So, a lot of people know that Noctis is in Tekken 7. Did you know the reason why he was in it was actually because of the cup noodles? Yeah, the company that owns Cup Noodles actually supports Evo, so they decided to say, "Hey, Tekken, can you actually put him into Tekken?" And they were like, "Okay." Even though I think that he should have been in Soul Calibur and put fucking Kiryu in Tekken 8, fucking do it. Fucking do it. You put Geese, a guy who's been canonically dead for fucking years. I'm just saying. I just don't get it. Don't get it. Hashtag Q for Tekken 8. Make it happen, America. Make it happen. Or Seijima. Or pretty much any Yakuza cat. We'll even take, put some random character here. If he's in Tekken 8, I'm going to kill somebody. Or I'll review it because of it. I don't know. It's overall fine. It could have done a better job, but I think it did fine. Just fine.
My overall point being is that it is fine DLC on its own, but its price point and its idea in and of itself is not easy to sell to most folks, and I can't blame them for ignoring it. I will say, though, that the gameplay in them are interesting enough and allow for different ideas for them that you can actually play as in the main game, which is awesome because, as I mentioned before, while combat is overall easy, switching every so often does help to spice it up a bit. So let's quickly go over Gladiola's style. He basically has two styles, pure offense, pure defense. While shielding, he gains rage, which amps up his damage, and as he builds damage, he builds up his bar for special attacks. While it is simplistic, it has its own fun, though the base game doesn't balance around it as, well, it requires a lot of aggression towards him, which the game doesn't do enough since most enemies are passive for the most part. Though speaking of more stuff in the game they added, here's something weird they did add. Cross promotions. Yes, while most people do not like the Cup Noodle one, which I really don't, they did add advertisement for two things at the time. Terra Battle, which was a mobile game made by Mistwalker, and yeah, I know, right? I was a little confused on why they allowed that, but hey, maybe there was still enough goodwill between Sakaguchi-san and the rest of Square Enix. It's a bit rushed, but the idea is interesting in and of itself, but again, it's rushed for my opinion. However, the more interesting one is the Final Fantasy XIV cross-promotion. It's actually pretty interesting because it gets its own side quests and certain enemies were actually put into the game for that one, which is really cool, by the way. Essentially, it's basically a Mikote from Final Fantasy XIV travels to this world and having to fight Garuda, which also allows us to gain a new summon of Garuda. Which, by the way, I don't know why this happened. After I got the Garuda summon, it was the only summon I got for the majority of the time. I'm not sure why. It was funny enough, and I enjoyed it for what it was. It does give a lot of XP, so if you're ever grinding, try to do that one. And actually, during this moment, it's really the best time to do the side quest before you're really too powerful and making everything around you really easy. So let's actually talk about some of the side quests for a moment. Sadly, a good chunk of the side quests aren't that well interesting. There are some ideas that are interesting enough where they will try to lead you into the other royal arms, but otherwise they're not that interesting and don't allow for much character insight between the party and other characters. It just feels like something you can do, but really don't ever feel like you have to do. Which I think it's kind of like the overall problem where the game is so easy. Doing side content is literally taking too much time to do because the rewards are too meager. And honestly, the most engaging ones are just the hunting quests because, well, you're engaging with the combat. Which I remind you is very easy. Though that didn't stop me as a younger me from doing all the side quests, which, oh god, I did too many of those. Though before we continue on, I do want to mention one thing that always weirded me was this guy. Yeah, like, everyone kind of mentions him, like, why does this guy look like this? I kind of then realized, in hindsight, why he's so weird. And it just came to me while I was thinking about it and thinking about my own weight. He's the only fat character in the entire game. Everyone is either thin or old. Like, I know that sounds weird, but that is literally the only thing weird about him. He's the only big character. It's just weird how I just noticed that. I'm sorry, I just wanted to mention that. It's just that weird. One more thing about the side quests. The only really interesting ones were the ones done by going to the camp and hanging out with your friends. Those were the only interesting ones, really. Because they do a good job of giving us insight on the characters, even if it's a small one, it's still interesting enough. But we've been going on long enough. Let's move through the fluff and actually get to Alticia, where we meet an old friend of Regis and Alticia's leader, who I know a lot of people make the joke about who she looks like, but the better question is, for me at least, because the game doesn't really give a good answer, why is she okay with the summon of Leviathan? Like, I don't know, if a person was coming into my city to destroy it, I would arrest them immediately until such time as it can be shown as a matter of fact that it won't happen. It's just weird that she's practically okay with the idea of her city being destroyed. I don't get it. Oh yeah, this is also something else in the game that I forgot to mention, though it's only because it's something that rarely comes up. Throughout the game, you can choose options for some reason. Like, I really don't get why this is here, as the only thing it does is give you a minor reward, and that's it. There's nothing else to it. In any case, Lunafreya is in town too, and she begins to awaken Leviathan. And as expected, it wrecks the place, as the Empire is also trying to destroy her so that she can't join up with Noctis. Noctis tries his best to stop Leviathan, but it's pretty worthless as it doesn't do much, until Luna gives him power of the past kings to go Super Saiyan God Super Saiyan, showing how really pointless getting all the royal arms really is. And after an easy fight, which I still to this day don't get why it's here, it's somehow still not enough to take her down, and it requires Titan to interfere to make her submit to Noctis. However, this actually leaves Noctis mostly immobile, as Arden comes out of nowhere and kills Lunafreya. Why he does this is very unclear. I'll talk about it more at the end, and I have to apologize again. I don't like doing that, but to make this more logical, so when I introduce it, it makes more sense when I do, I have to talk about it at the end. In any case, this pretty much devastates Noctis, as he really did love Luna, even if they didn't give us enough scenes of them being together, and their notes to one another. You know, it's because of stuff like this that people really don't like the story of 15, and I don't really blame them. This sort of thing is really annoying. This also forces him to go unconscious for a little bit. After awakening, we learned during the time that he was out, Ignis became blind. This semi-leads into Ignis DLC, as it's also kind of the best DLC as it ties into Ignis' character, and it also has an interesting idea of the relationship between Ignis and Noctis, which is again more explored in the anime, which I have to repeat because it is a thing. It is free and available for everyone, so I'm not really against it. In any case, Ignis DLC is basically just trying to explain what happened after Noctis went unconscious. Basically, he joined up with Ravis to help get Noctis and Lunafreya away, as Arden was actually prepared to kill Noctis, until he used the Ring of Lucius. I'll try to explain. It's an important ring that's tied into the crystal that powers it, and again, it's tied to a lot of stuff near the end. Just note it's a really powerful ring that basically Ignis wears, but it costs him his eyesight to use it. This does push Arden back enough so that the rest of the crew can come back and help him. However, again, it's too late for Ignis, as his eyes will forever remain shut. As a whole, the story of Ignis DLC is fine enough. Could have done some rework, but otherwise it's fine. What really made it good was the gameplay. It's mostly focused on his speed. He also has elements that allow him to do multiple things in battle, like hitting multiple foes or zipping around to multiple foes at a time. which is simple enough to perform as it's all about dealing damage fast, and it's overall enjoyable. There's also clarity which allows him to perform special attacks that deal a lot of damage. He also gets a grapple hook, and it's okay in theory, but it lacks use in combat, and is only ever useful in the fight against Noctis, which is a fun bonus, but it is very brutal. In fact, it crashed my game once, which was actually a first for me because I never actually dealt with that before. In any case, after the battle, they are moving forward while Noctis is a bit sulking after, losing someone precious to him. Gladiolus goes overboard trying to make him move past it and tells Noctis to just get over it and become the king already. And it's just a needless conflict because it's already what we're doing, and I don't think the plot does this well enough to justify Gladiolus' position. Gladiolus mentioned earlier, he is the shield. He's there to help him. And I get the idea of what he's doing here, trying to push Noctis in the right direction, get him back into the flow of things. But at the same time, it is not particularly framed that way. It is also not helped that the game does not elaborate on what his issue is. I also kind of want to side note for a moment because this just came to me because I was talking about my script to a friend of mine, and I never mentioned once that, a lot of people mention that Noctis looks like an emo, when his personality never matches that sort of archetype. And I feel like this is the only time where he ever does, and it's really justified. I just wanted to mention that because it was interesting in my mind, but in any case, let's actually talk about why I don't feel as though this is given enough time or space to work. Throughout the game, the story does not give him a particular reason for being unable to do it, even though the story gives him at least some ideas of why he couldn't be already. I think the game's plot should have been more about Noctis getting over his own self-doubt and worth and become something better with his brothers along the way, helping becoming the better person to help everyone through their own characters, helping out and supporting. I only mention this as this entire issue right now sort of gets unresolved, with the issue somehow more focusing on Ignis' blindness, which jumpstarts the entire issue to begin with, and its resolution is, we just keep going. It's as though that the plot didn't have enough time or enough moments in it to allow it to, more focus on this aspect, which is really strange. Though then again, the game was already in this mess of they were trying to push it out the door. I would honestly say that everything after Alticia is really where the story begins to struggle and is unable to more effectively tell its story. I mean, it was always struggling beforehand, it's just that it's more apparent. In any case, after traveling some more, Arden appears in front of them and brings in the Empire, and at one point holding Prompto to gunpoint. Noctis knocks him over the train, but realizes too late that it was actually Prompto, Arden using some magic to make this trick. I literally don't know how the heck this works, because they don't actually explain this. Strangely enough, Noctis' emotional state after this is a little weird because he's trying to push forward when most people would have agreed that he should have been even more stressed out because of, again, he hurt his friend. Which, let's actually go into Prompto's DLC. Prompto's DLC basically deals with his backstory and his issues, as we need to talk about the Empire for a moment and really talk about them in a story sense, as they're not much of a thing. Sure, they would at times come and harass you, but that's all they did. Heck, the most they've ever done to me in story terms was come after me time after time again, 3 times in a row, and it got really annoying real quick. The Empire, in and of itself, is not much of a threat. We do not learn anything about these people at all, and really, most of these guys will be forgotten and ignored for pretty much the entire story. See this guy? And we see his mech, and it blows up, but he's still fine with this other guy who's still fine. And they really serve to show what's the problem with the Empire, where basically we're dealing with an unknown enemy who is easily defeatable and doesn't really matter into the plot at all. I mean, like, I forgot most of their names already, and really, I even forgot the main villain of this DLC because, again, he is that boring. Who, mind you, by the way, is also Prompto's father slash original body because he's actually a clone of that guy. And I again remind you all, I forgot his name. I didn't even remember it while looking at the footage. And I mean, like, it's not help when there's a better villain in front of me all the time. Which, let's actually talk about Arden as a villain. He's actually my favorite type of villain. The one who's playfully evil, but you both know he can kill you without a second thought. Arden's a real joy to watch and hear, and he's just messes with the group a lot, but doesn't give enough reasons as to why he's doing it. And it just adds to the mystery, which we will need to explain near the end because it's tied to a lot of other stuff and it's really complicated. In any case, let's get back to Prompto. This section is basically him gaining some self-confidence in himself to truly be a part of the group as he destroys this guy's snow worm. In any case, his gameplay is all about the guns. He just uses them to shoot around foes, though for the most part, that is really it. Weirdly enough, there is some side quests in the game for some reason. I really don't get why they're there because all the rewards for them are not worth it. Especially the ones to upgrade your snowmobile. I seriously, to this day, don't get why it exists. I want to stress that Prompto's gameplay is fine, it's just a shooter. That's pretty much it. The section ends with Prompto being moved to the capital, to the Empire, and it's just not a really good way to lead into the main game, but whatever. But let's go back to the others for a moment. They're trying to get their way to the Empire, and Arden appears again. For the record, I am skipping one section. It's more tied to another thing in the game that I need to talk about, because it's just that sort of thing. I'm sorry. It's tied to a lot of things near the end. Arden then suddenly and somehow turns off all their weapons. They really don't give an idea of how this is even possible. My guess is that they cut the connection to the crystal, but that's not even a good enough reason. It literally doesn't make any amount of sense, because later on, Arden will be able to give Gladiolus and Ignis their weapons back, but not Noctis. I really don't get it. It never made any sense. We also lose, sadly, the most valuable team member, the Regalia. Yes, seriously, the game had a more impactful scene of the car dying than everyone else beforehand. I will not lie. This is some bad writing here. The group gets separated as Noctis is all alone and must use the Ring of Lucius to, well, progress. This is where we need to talk about Chapter 13, and I get the complaint that the game makes this section go on way longer than it needs to be, and I agree with that. But at the same time, I think the section is fine? Let me explain. The point of it is to show off how weak Noctis is without his powers. To show off that why he needed his friends and why he needs to become stronger. Like the symbolism of him putting on the ring, showing off that he is now fully becoming the king and all that junk. But the section is ruined because they basically updated it so that the ring is way more powerful now, which let's actually go over it right now. The ring has the ability of death. Basically, it drains a foe to death. And it's pretty funny because of how it makes the enemies look. It's hilarious. And most enemies are vulnerable to it, but more times than not, if they're like a big boss, you're better off just fighting them normally than using the ring. Though it does slow them down, a lot. I say that last part, though there is one boss that is really weak against it, that being the super boss, the Animate Tortoise, where basically you drain it and yeah, that's it. That is the literal strategy for beating the basic super boss. I think there are other super bosses, but I don't remember them. After regrouping with the others and gaining back their powers, Noctis goes to the crystal so that he may reclaim it and gain the powers of the crystal. But for some strange reason, it begins to suck in Noctis, as Ardyn appears and basically elaborates on his goal. As we learned, Ardyn's true name is that he is a Lucius. Basically, he's Noctis' great ancestor. And he sort of elaborates on his backstory, though it's again more confusing as it's tied to the DLC. And again, we'll need to talk about the DLC at the end, plus needing to explain the base ending so it makes sense. Which we will in a moment because we need to talk about what the heck is going on. So Noctis wakes up in a weird dimension with Bahamut, who basically tries to elaborate the plot as it wasn't really explained well, nor given enough focus to actually elaborate on why it's important. For example, the Star Scourge. You might be looking to me for a moment and asking, wait, what the heck is the Star Scourge? And therein lies the problem. The game doesn't give enough focus to this important, and I mean very important plot point, when it is by far one of the most important things to the plot. So, let's elaborate. Basically, it's a malaria-like virus. Yes, I know that last part just sounds weird, like, what the fuck? I mean, like, I only say that because that's what it is. That is what the lore says it is. Basically, the scene tries to elaborate that, okay, the Star Scourge is where demons come from. And basically, yeah, the demons are causing a lot of damages to the world. Earlier in the game, after Lunafreya died, the world was actually more dying. And in fact was slowing down to the point where night was becoming more of a thing. Bahamut has a plan. Basically, Ardyn, the main villain, is basically now more of the central figure point of where the Star Scourge is, or like where the central thing is. So if you destroy Ardyn, who's acting as, again, the medium for the Star Scourge, you will destroy the Star Scourge along with demonkind. However, in order to gain the power enough to do that, Noctis must give up his own life in order to gain that power for a solid moment in order to do this. And while he needs to also absorb all the power of the crystal in order to do this. However, it takes a long while before he is able to absorb it all, taking about 10 years before he can actually fully absorb the power. Which, speaking of, I wasn't actually going to mention this until I played it, and I might as well now because I got footage. Let's actually talk about Comrade. Okay, remember that Kingsglaive movie I mentioned earlier and how I said it wasn't that important? It still isn't. This entire section is so pointless that you can remove it with none of the issues. So let's elaborate. Comrades is basically the multiplayer aspect, which I have no idea why they thought this was a good idea, but hey, whatever. Essentially, it tries to elaborate on what happened during the years before Noctis returned, and it's fine, I guess. Like, I get the idea of what they're trying to do, showing off how someone in the normal universe of FF15 handles things compared to the crew, which is really interesting, but overall it is a grindy thing that it's just boring. Like, I have nothing more to say about it other than it is so boring. The only really interesting thing about it is that you get very exclusive weapons for that mode in particular, even though they just use the modes from the other royal arms, but it doesn't really matter. It really doesn't matter. So, okay, basically, after Noctis regroups with his friends, they go for the final charge against Ardyn, who's there waiting with Infred. If you're wondering what the hell the deal with Infred, yeah, I was wondering that too. So, okay, remember Getiana? She's actually Shiva, or one part of Shiva? I'm not really sure about that. They don't actually elaborate on Shiva that much. Anyway, Infred was like some really cool guy back in the day. Basically, we actually go to ruins once where they were like super high tech. Well, that was thanks to Infrit going like, I like you guys. I like you, humanity. Until humanity kind of went like, uh, go fuck yourself. And Infrit was like, these sons of bitches. In which, where he began attacking humanity. However, the Astrals are all like, okay, look, we might have our own issues with humanity, but we still gotta protect them. So basically, they all banded together to defeat him, and he got locked away. Which, at some point, Arden got to him and infected him with the Star Scourge, and that's more tied into Arden stuff. We'll need to talk about that later. I'm sorry, it's just how it is. And after defeating Infrit, they basically defeat Arden. There's a very good moment before the final ceremony for the Knights of the Round, basically. And it's a really good scene. I really enjoy that scene. It just encapsulates everything Noctis was doing. His resolve for his friends and stuff. It's a really good scene. In fact, let's actually go back for a moment and talk about how they basically expanded this section in the Royal Edition, and it's really pointless, but hey, they added stuff, I guess. It's cool. It's fine. I'm not into it, but it's a thing. And after a battle with Arden, the world is saved, yada yada yada. And, well, after the game credits roll, we see Noctis and Lunafreya together in the afterlife, enjoying each other's moments, heart to heart, yada yada yada. And we kind of see, like, the true title, which I actually kind of like. It's a really cool one. I kind of wish it was the real one, or the one we actually got at the end, but it doesn't really matter. It's cool. It's cool.
So, originally, I was just gonna stop here and just say, yada yada yada, my final thoughts, but I did see episode Arden after this, so I'll try to explain it and might as well just talk about it now. It's okay. Let's talk about it.
So, okay, I haven't actually played through Arden's DLC, basically, because I don't want to pay him money for that, and I got the one on the cheap end because I forgot the Arden DLC in general. In any case, let's actually just quickly go through the DLC and elaborate on what they were doing. So, Arden's DLC elaborates on, well, Arden's backstory, about how he was the former king of Lucius until his brother betrayed him, and also how the crystal rejected him because he was absorbing Dark Scourge into himself so that others may be healed, but that was a big no-no, and yada yada yada, he got betrayed by the gods because basically he was actually meant to become the Star Scourge medium, which is confusing. I'm not entirely sure. I think, and mind you, I apologize on the Star Scourge medium because I'm unsure. That's just the idea I got in the story. And this is where the idea of the DLC comes into fruition. You see, at the end of the game DLC, Arden can accept this as a matter of fact and accept his fate, or he can reject it and fight against this. This will lead into the other DLC. Well, I say that, but that's not possible anymore because those DLCs were cancelled after Tabata left. And, well, the only thing we know about the DLC is basically what we got from the book. And essentially, the idea was that at the end, they would take down Bahamut because he took the Star Scourge into him because he said, fuck humanity at this point. Which would lead into Arden somehow, with the help of Noctis, taking down Bahamut and the gods themselves, taking away magic from Aeolus forever. Like, that is just an interpretation of the events. I have not read that book. That is what I have read online and what a friend told me. Final live bit.
And, sadly, that's how Final Fantasy 15 ends. On a tragedy. The video's title for this game is Final Fantasy 15, the twice unfinished game. and it really shows. At the end of the day, I love Final Fantasy 15. It has a personal part of my history and made me say, I love this game, but I'm also vastly disappointed. The graphics are fine, the gameplay is overall simplistic but has its own little charm that can wear on you very thinly. They did add stuff to the game over time, and the updates did try to fix stuff, but after the cancellation of the rest of the new DLC, it just stopped. And that story I just went over, and really you can understand that, yeah, it's not great. It's not. But I love it anyway. And that was Final Fantasy 15, the twice unfinished game. Sadly, it never will be. I hope to see you all next time. Like, comment, subscribe, whatever. Do whatever you want, man. It's not my call. Next time we'll do another RPG, which won't take me as long because I'm not going to be emotionally invested in it. So I won't feel like, oh god, I made a mistake here or here or there. Just, I feel personal about it, okay? So, see you next time.